Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about a book that's had a big impact on a lot of people. Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yes, such a good one. Very practical.
Exactly. It
Huh?
really is.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people are looking for that, right? Like, okay, we all have these big dreams and goals, but how do we actually get there?
Yeah, he gives you the tools.
Yeah, and he really breaks it down step by step. So that's what we're going to do today.
Sounds good.
All right, so Clear starts off by talking about the power of tiny gains and losses.
This is such a key concept, right?
Yeah, and it's so counterintuitive because we're always looking for these like huge transformations.
Right. We want that quick fix.
Yeah, exactly. And he's saying it's actually the opposite.
Yeah, it's the small things you do every day that really add up over time.
And he uses this really cool example of the British cycling team.
Oh, yeah. Dave Brailsford?
Yeah, right. So he was the coach who basically took this team that was like, not doing so well and turned them into champions. Olympic gold medals, Tour de France victories, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the way he did it was by focusing on these tiny 1% improvements across every aspect of the team.
Everything from like the aerodynamics of the bikes to the athletes' sleep schedules.
And it's just wild to think that like those tiny little tweaks led to such massive results.
Yeah, and the point he's making is that this isn't just some like fluke or a special thing with cycling.
Right.
This is like a universal principle.
Like it applies to everything.
Everything. Yeah, your
Yeah.
finances, your health, your relationships.
So like saving a little bit of money every day or,
Yeah.
going for a walk every day, even just reading for like 15 minutes a day.
Exactly. All those little things can really snowball into something big.
But it's not always easy, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't always see those results immediately.
Right. And that's where he talks about the valley of disappointment.
Ooh, yeah, the valley of disappointment. Tell me about that.
Well, it's that period where you're putting in the work, you're doing the right things, but you're not seeing those big results yet.
And it can be so demotivating.
It's that point where a lot of people give up because they're looking for that like linear progress. They want to see those results right away.
And when they don't, they get discouraged.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of us get stuck. We get impatient. We think, oh, it's not working. I might as well quit.
Right. And Clear is saying that you have to push through that.
You have to trust the process and know that those big breakthroughs, those moments where you're like, wow, this is actually working, often come after a long period of what feels like insignificant effort.
So it's almost like a delayed gratification thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like
Yeah.
you're planting these seeds and you have to be patient and keep watering them, even though you don't see anything happening above ground.
Eventually they sprout.
Exactly. And he calls that the plateau of latent potential. It's that point where all that hard work you've been putting in finally breaks through and you start seeing those big results.
That's so cool. And it makes me think about all the times I've given up on something too soon.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah, but it's like you have to trust that if you keep showing up and doing the work, eventually it will pay off.
Yeah, and that leads us to another big idea in the book, which is this idea of focusing on systems instead of goals.
Okay, this is a really interesting one. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is where Clear kind of challenges the traditional way we think about achieving things.
So we're ditching goals altogether.
Well, not entirely, but he's saying that goals are only part of the equation.
Okay.
He argues that winners and losers often have the same goals. What sets them apart are the systems they have in place.
So it's not about the destination, it's about the journey and the steps you take to get there.
Exactly. Goals are about the outcome systems, are about the process. So, for example, if you want to write a book, having a goal of finishing the manuscript is great.
But it's the daily writing habit that actually gets you there.
Exactly. The system is the key.
And he gives some pretty compelling reasons why we should focus on systems instead of goals, right?
He lays out three main problems with a goals-first mentality.
Let's hear them.
Okay, so first, as we just discussed, goals themselves don't guarantee success. It's the systems that drive progress, right? Second, achieving a goal is often momentary change. You hit the finish line. But then, what systems are about ongoing growth and improvement?
Okay, that makes sense.
And third, goals can actually make you less happy in the present moment because they place happiness in the future, contingent on achieving something. Systems, on the other hand, allow you to find satisfaction in the process itself every single day.
That's such a good point. I've never thought about it that way before.
It's a real mindset shift.
Yeah, and it makes me think about like, you know how we often put off happiness until we achieve a certain goal, like, oh, I'll be happy when I lose 10 pounds, or I'll be happy when I get that promotion. But what if we could be happy now while we're working towards those things?
Exactly. That's the power of focusing on systems.
And he has this great quote that sums it up perfectly.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
fix the inputs and the outputs will fix themselves.
I love that it's so simple but so profound.
Yeah.
It really is, and it applies to so many areas of life. Like if you focus on building the right habits and routines, the results will naturally follow.
It's about creating a system that works for you.
All right, so we've talked about the power of tiny gains and the importance of focusing on systems, but Clear doesn't stop there. He goes even deeper into the psychology of change with this idea of identity-based habits.
Oh, yeah. This is where it gets really interesting.
So tell me more about this idea of identity-based habits.
Well, Clear argues that lasting change starts with transforming your beliefs about yourself.
So it's not just about changing your actions, it's about changing your identity.
Exactly. He's saying that your habits are essentially a reflection of your identity. What you do consistently is a signal to yourself and the world about the type of person you believe yourself to be.
So if I want to change my behavior for the long haul, I need to change the story I tell myself about who I am.
Exactly. It's like if you want to become a runner, you have to start seeing yourself as a runner.
And then your actions will follow.
Right. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And he uses some really cool examples to illustrate this, right? Like that study with voters.
Oh, yeah. The one where they found that people who identified as being a voter were more likely to actually vote.
Compared to those who simply intended to vote.
Exactly. It's the difference between saying I'm a runner and I want to run.
Wow, that's powerful. And it makes me think about all the other areas of life where this applies. Like, if you see yourself as a healthy eater, you're more likely to make healthy choices.
Absolutely. And it works both ways. Your habits shape your identity, and your identity shapes your habits.
It's this beautiful feedback loop.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. But knowing this isn't enough, we need practical tools to actually build and break habits.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
Well, that's where Clear introduces his 4 laws of behavior change.
Okay, I'm ready for the secret formula.
It's not really a secret, but it is a powerful framework.
So what are these 4 laws?
They are make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
Okay, let's break those down one by one.
All right, let's do it. So the first law is all about making the cue for the habit obvious, like really obvious.
Right, because
Yeah.
if you don't even notice the cue, you're never going to trigger the habit.
Exactly. And Clear gives this really interesting example of Japanese railway workers who use something called point and call.
Point and call, what's that?
It's this system where they basically point at something and call out what they're doing as they're doing it.
So like if they're switching a lever, they'll point at the lever and say, switching lever.
Exactly. And it might seem a little silly, but it's actually really effective in reducing errors.
Because it forces them to be more present and aware of what they're doing.
Exactly. And Clear suggests we can use a similar principle in our own lives by creating something called a habit scorecard.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about this. Tell me more about how that works.
So basically, you take a piece of paper or, use a spreadsheet or whatever works for you, and you just list out all the habits you do in a typical day.
And
And then you go through and categorize each habit as either good, bad, or neutral.
so like brushing your teeth would be a good habit, eating junk food would be a bad habit, and scrolling through social media would be
Probably neutral, although some people might argue it's a bad habit.
true. Yeah, it depends on how much time you spend doing it, I guess.
Right. But the point is that this exercise forces you to become aware of your habits, even the ones you do without thinking.
It's like shining a light on your autopilot mode.
Exactly. And once you have that awareness, you can start to make deliberate choices about the habits you want to cultivate.
Okay, so that's make it obvious. What about the second law, make it attractive?
This is all about understanding the power of motivation and how to make your desired habits more appealing.
Because let's be real, we're more likely to stick with something if we actually enjoy doing it.
Exactly. And one way to make a habit more attractive is to associate it with something you already enjoy.
So like if you want to start exercising, you could listen to your favorite podcast while you work out.
Exactly. Or if you want to read more, you could join a book club with friends.
Right, so you're pairing the habit with something that already makes you happy.
Yeah. And another important aspect of this law is understanding the role of social influence.
Oh yeah, like how we're more likely to adopt a habit if we see people we admire doing it.
Exactly. Clear talks about the Polgar sisters, who were these 3 chess prodigies raised in a family where chess was like everything.
So they were surrounded by people who loved and valued chess.
Exactly. Their parents made it attractive, fun, and rewarding.
And they ended up becoming some of the best chess players in the world.
Yeah. It's amazing how much our environment and the people around us can influence our habits.
Okay, so we've got make it obvious and make it attractive. What's the third law?
Make it easy.
As in easy to do.
Exactly. This law is all about reducing friction and making your desired habits as effortless as possible.
And this is where the 2-minute rule comes in, right?
Yes, this is one of my favorite concepts in the book.
So how does it work?
Basically, the idea is to break down your desired habit into its simplest form, something that takes less than 2 minutes to do.
So if you want to start running, you just put on your running shoes.
Exactly. Or if you want to write a book, you just write one sentence.
The point is to make it so easy to start that you can't say no.
Right. And once you overcome that initial inertia, it's much easier to keep going.
It's like that old saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Exactly. And the 2-minute rule is all about making that first step as easy as possible.
So you're basically tricking your brain into getting started.
In a way, yeah, it's about building momentum and making the habit as frictionless as possible.
Okay, I like it. What about the fourth law? Make it satisfying.
This is all about reward and making your desired habits enjoyable so you're more likely to stick with them.
Because let's face it, we're all suckers for a little instant gratification.
Exactly. If a habit feels good, we're more likely to repeat it.
So how do we make our good habits more satisfying?
Well, one way is to use reinforcement strategies, like giving yourself a small reward after completing the habit.
So like if you're trying to eat healthier, you could reward yourself with a piece of dark chocolate after a week of clean eating.
Exactly. Or if you're trying to exercise more, you could buy yourself a new workout outfit.
So you're associating the habit with something positive.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything big. Even just a small sense of accomplishment can be enough to reinforce the habit.
And he also talks about the importance of tracking your progress, right?
Yes, tracking is a great way to make a habit more satisfying because it gives you a visual representation of your progress.
And it's also a way to hold yourself accountable.
Exactly. There's something about seeing those check marks on your habit tracker that just feels good.
Yeah, it's like a tangible reminder of your commitment and the progress you're making.
Exactly. And it helps to keep you motivated, especially in those early stages when you might not be seeing huge results.
So these 4 laws of behavior change are really like the foundation for building better habits.
They are, and the cool thing is that they can be applied to pretty much any habit you want to build or break.
And they're all about understanding the psychology behind habit formation.
Exactly. It's not just about willpower or motivation. It's about working with your brain's natural tendencies.
And making it easier for yourself to do the things you want to do.
Exactly, and that's what I love about Atomic Habits. It's all about making small changes that lead to big results.
And it's not just about building good habits, it's also about breaking bad ones.
Right, and that's where things can get a little tricky.
Because bad habits are often so ingrained in our routines.
They are, and they're often associated with pleasure or comfort, which makes them hard to resist.
So how do we break those bad habits?
Well, Clear suggests that one of the most effective ways is to make them unsatisfying.
So we need to flip the script and associate those bad habits with negative consequences.
Exactly, like if you're trying to quit smoking, you could think about all the health problems it can cause.
Or if you're trying to cut back on sugar, you could think about how it makes you feel sluggish and bloated.
Exactly. The key is to make the negative consequences more immediate and visceral.
And he also talks about the importance of accountability, right?
Yes, accountability can be a powerful tool for breaking bad habits because it makes you more aware of your actions and less likely to slip up.
And it's not just about being accountable to yourself. It can also be helpful to have an accountability partner.
Like a friend or family member who can support you and keep you on track.
Or even a coach or therapist.
Yeah, someone who can provide encouragement and guidance.
And he gives this crazy example of an entrepreneur who lost over 20 pounds by creating a habit contract with his wife and trainer.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It involves some pretty serious financial penalties if he didn't stick to his diet and exercise plan.
Wow, that's commitment.
It is, but it clearly worked for him.
So sometimes we need that extra push to really stay on track.
Yeah, and sometimes that push comes from ourselves, and sometimes it comes from the people around us.
Okay, so we've talked about making bad habits unsatisfying and using accountability, but Clear also emphasizes the importance of environment design.
Yes, this is a key concept in the book, and it's all about using your surroundings to make good habits easier and bad habits harder.
So it's like setting yourself up for success before you even start.
Exactly. And he gives some really interesting examples, like how rearranging your fridge so that the healthy options are front and center can influence your food choices.
Because if you see the junk food first, you're more likely to grab it.
Right. But if you see the fruits and vegetables first, you're more likely to make a healthier choice.
And it's not just about food. It can apply to any habit. Like if you want to read more, you could put a book on your nightstand.
Exactly. Or if you want to exercise more, You could leave your workout clothes out the night before.
So you're making it as easy as possible to do the things you want to do.
Exactly. And on the flip side, you can make bad habits harder by removing the cues that trigger them.
So like if you're trying to quit smoking, you could get rid of all the ashtrays in your house.
Exactly. Or if you're trying to cut back on social media, you could delete the apps from your phone.
The point is to make it as inconvenient as possible to engage in those bad habits.
And as convenient as possible to engage in the good ones.
It's like you're creating a path of least resistance for your desired behaviors.
Exactly. And this brings us to another interesting concept in the book, the Goldilocks rule.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about the Goldilocks rule.
Well, it's this idea that habits need to be challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that they feel overwhelming.
So it's about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The porridge can't be too hot or too cold. It has to be just right.
And the same goes for our habits.
Exactly. If a habit is too easy, we get bored. And if it's too hard, we get discouraged.
So we need to find that middle ground that keeps us motivated and engaged.
Exactly. And Clear argues that this is how we achieve what he calls flow states.
Oh yeah, flow states are those moments when you're completely absorbed in an activity and time seems to fly by.
It's exactly. Those flow states often occur when we're working on tasks that are just challenging enough to keep us engaged, but not so challenging that they feel overwhelming.
So it's like finding that perfect balance between boredom and anxiety.
Exactly. And when we find that balance, we're more likely to stick with the habit and make progress.
That's so cool, and it makes me think about all the times I've given up on something because it was either too easy or too hard.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah, but now I realize that it wasn't necessarily a lack of willpower or motivation. It was just that the habit wasn't quite right for me.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the Goldilocks rule. It gives you permission to adjust your habits until you find that sweet spot.
And he also talks about how this ties into our identity, right?
He does. He argues that once you start embodying a new identity, you have to be careful not to get complacent.
So just because you've achieved a certain level of success doesn't mean you should stop growing and evolving.
Exactly. It's like a sculptor who continues to refine their work even after they've achieved a certain level of mastery.
Always looking for ways to make it even better.
Exactly. It's about embracing a growth mindset and constantly striving to become the best version of yourself.
That's such a powerful message, and I think it's something we can all apply to our lives.
I agree. And I think the great place to end our deep dive into Atomic Habits.
Yes. I've learned so much from this book, and I hope our listeners have too.
Me too. It's such a valuable resource for anyone who wants to create lasting change in their lives.
And remember, Clear's challenge to us: what is one small habit you can start today that will make a difference a year from now?
That's a great question to ponder.
And on that note, we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Atomic Habits.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. Start small, stay consistent, and embrace the journey.
Yeah, it's like we got to kind of shift our thinking. Instead of dreading those kind of boring everyday tasks, we got to see them as opportunities for growth.
Right, because they are the building blocks.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what Clear says? He says, everyone feels that dip in enthusiasm sometimes. But the people who actually make those lasting changes, they're the ones who can kind of push through that,
They embrace the grind.
Yeah, exactly. They find satisfaction not just in the end goal, but in the process itself.
Like a marathon runner, they don't love every single mile.
No way. But they know that each step is getting them closer to the finish line.
So how do we get better at that? Like, how do we cultivate that kind of discipline?
Well, one thing Claire talks about is the importance of what he calls habit tracking.
Oh, yeah, like monitoring your progress.
Exactly. It's about holding yourself accountable and noticing those small wins along the way.
And that's where that habit scorecard comes in handy, right?
Totally. Because you start by just being aware of what you're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you start making changes, you can actually see that progress.
And that can be super motivating.
It is. There's something so satisfying about checking things off a list or seeing a streak of successful days.
It's like a visual reminder of your commitment.
Yeah. And it helps to reinforce those good habits.
So it's not just about setting a habit and then forgetting about it.
Nope. It's about actively engaging with the process and making adjustments as you go.
It's like a continuous feedback loop.
Exactly. And, another thing that Clear keeps coming back to is this idea that our identity shapes our actions, and our actions shape our identity.
Right. It's like a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah. And remember those examples we talked about, like the voter study and incorporating exercise into one's identity?
Totally. It's like when you start seeing yourself as a runner or a writer, Those actions just become part of who you are.
Exactly. It's no longer this thing you have to force yourself to do. It's just something you do because it's part of your identity.
And it makes it so much easier to stick with it.
For sure. But even when you've established new habits and really embraced this new identity, Claire says it's important to keep striving for improvement.
So don't get complacent.
Exactly. It's like that sculptor who keeps refining their work even after they've achieved a certain level of mastery.
Always looking for ways to make it even better.
Right. And I think that's a great analogy for personal growth. It's an ongoing process.
It is. We never really arrive.
And that can be exciting or daunting, depending on how you look at it.
True, but I think if we embrace this idea of continuous improvement, it can be a really fulfilling journey.
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Atomic Habits, I want to leave you with this question from Clear Voice. What is one small habit you can start today that will make a difference a year from now?
That's a great question to ponder.
It is. And I hope this conversation has inspired you to start building those atomic habits that can really transform your life.
Me too. It's been such a fascinating exploration of how to create lasting change.
Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress one small step at a time.
Exactly. Start small, stay consistent, and embrace the journey.
And who knows, maybe a year from now, you'll be amazed at how far you've come.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Atomic Habits.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a book that's changing the world.